Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new visual showcase for the EU Review. In a recent episode of The Obscure Side, our side series, I said we'd be taking a look in a future obscure side at the Star Wars Missions, Episode 1 Adventures, and Star Wars Adventures Kiddie RPG. It struck me though that this is something that a lot of people have asked about, so maybe this is something that better bears being seen rather than just heard. So skip that obscure side, we won't be doing that one. Instead, this visual showcase will focus on those three series. You may be used to the idea of a role-playing game, and certainly Star Wars has had its share. We had the ones from West End Games, Wizards of the Coast, and another one coming from, I believe it's called Fantasy Flight in the near future. Well, not all RPGs need to be quite as complex as those were. If you want to get kids into it in the beginning, what you need is something to draw them in, like a Star Wars story, and some very simple play mechanics, perhaps with visual aids to go with it, to keep the kids playing and get them to get over that hurdle that you might say exists to get into a game in terms of the need for more mechanics, the need to understand more than you might already understand about role-playing games in general. They're somewhat of a difficult genre to get into if you haven't already got used to that type of mechanics. But this is a very simplified system that Scholastic came up with, and they use that system for three different Star Wars, I would call them kids RPGs or kid games. What you have is Star Wars Missions, which was released starting in 1997, then Episode 1 Adventures, which began in 1999, and then Star Wars Adventures, which picked up in 2003. I think they were originally soliciting it in 2002. The first one, I believe, did come out in 2003. In every case, they were very, very similar, but they had some significant differences in terms of their layout and how the series was approached. We're going to take a look at each here in turn as they become very sought after in places like eBay. They're very hard to find these days, but could be something you might want to actually take the time and money to hunt down, depending on how you feel about gaming materials. The first series was Star Wars Missions. It came initially in this container here, a little nice Darth Vader cover. Now inside that package you had a whole lot of materials. You have a quick how to play instruction sheet. You have a welcome to Star Wars Missions. It's mainly basically just for the parent to see. You have your mission guide, which is a much more detailed set of instructions here. You have your mission log, which is basically like a journal where you can keep track of what you have and haven't done in the adventures. You have a membership card, essentially, I hereby accept my mission. You have a score sheet to keep track of stats that you need to keep track of throughout the course of the game. You have a 12-sided die, or a D12 here, and you have a 6-sided die. Now, the way the game is played is that each time you use those same basic starter materials, okay? And then each package would come with the gaming materials, okay? Each one would come with one of these. A Star Wars Missions book. We have Star Wars Missions here, Assault on Yavin 4 by Ryder Wyndham. Star Wars Missions was written by a combination of Ryder Wyndham and Dave Wolverton, who are of course known for other Star Wars works. In this case, you'd read a story, regular old prose story here, okay? And you would wind up getting to what's called a mission briefing. And once you get to the mission briefing and proceed forward, you wind up finding places where the story stops and it begins some gaming instructions, sort of like a choose-your-own-adventure. Okay? Choose one weapon, either the blaster pistol or the blaster rifle, etc., etc. And it talks you through running the sort of RPG-style portion of the game. So the game bits and the prose fiction bits are built into one book for Star Wars Missions. Now you might say, well, okay, I'm using RPG stuff, but what about the stats? Don't you have to have stats and such for an RPG? That's also within these packages. Because with the Star Wars Missions book, you would get a nifty little poster or map of some sort each time around. And more importantly, a bunch of little cards. Cards for vehicles, cards for characters, cards for weapons and such. And you have a cool little picture in the front. This is Wes Jansen. And on the back, stats that you would use within the game. Charm, power, skills, stealth, strength, weaponry, and so forth. Same thing for the weapons and such. Close range accuracy, mid-range accuracy, etc., etc. Little cards with stats on the back every single time. And as you went into a game, you would be choosing which character to use, what weapons for them to carry, and so forth. And in theory, you should use the ones that came with that particular story. But you could mix and match them later. It's not like they're going to get you in trouble for doing it, right? So as you went along, you had more options to go back and replay previous books. It's kind of neat. There's some oddball stories, for the most part set between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. They're weird tales at times. They don't have a big impact on anything. But when it comes to oddball Star Wars stories, it kind of mixes the idea of choose your own adventure, RPG stuff, prose fiction. Star Wars Missions actually did a pretty good job of it. It reminds me a lot, actually, of those solitaire adventures that get you used to the West End Games RPG, except the mechanics here are much, much simpler, and it blends in stats that aren't in books, but are on cards that are similar, I guess you could say, to a trading card game. Along with each pack, you'd also receive issues of Star Wars Kids, a different version than what was on the newsstands, and Star Wars Kids often included individual comics, like, in this case, The Rebel Thief, or X-Wing Marks the Spot, and such. So you got a collection of these, and the books, and the cards, and so forth, if you picked up all 20 of the packs. The first one coming with the starter materials in the case, the rest of them coming just with the books and the stuff that goes with them. A neat little series. But that was only the start, the first attempt by Scholastic to make a Star Wars-based RPG. Unfortunately, as they moved on to 2 more series, the results were somewhat mixed. We pick up with Episode 1 Adventures, with a cool Darth Maul face, okay? We got this on things like book covers. I got a jacket with the thing on the back if you watch the lightsaber review. This is the Episode 1 Adventures case, and again, everything you need to play the game is inside the case or with the first package that you receive. Now in the starter set for this one, aside from the case, you got I believe it's a D20, 20-sided die here. You got a, forgive me gamers, I'm not a huge gamer, a what, 8-sided, 1, 2, 3, 4, oh no, I guess it's a 10-sided die here. No 6-sided die this time around. That's for wimps. You also got another membership card, the Adventure Guide, which is an incredibly short instruction book here, much shorter than the other, a point pad, again to keep track of your stats throughout your adventure, just like the previous one, a so-called notebook, which again is just sort of a journal to keep track of what you did when you played, and then you had the first installment. And in this case, there weren't 20. This one got smaller. They all got progressively smaller. This one had 15 separate adventures in it. Each time, you got a magazine again, right? In this case, Star Wars Kids, another one different from the newsstand edition. Nothing in the way of interior comic books to really give us much oomph for this. A lot of people just kind of tossed these aside, as I did. Each pack introduced new characters, vehicles, weapons, and such, again, with cards. It, of course, had stats on the back to let you use it with the game, just like in the previous case. The card layout changed, but it's basically the same general idea. Where Episode 1 Adventures really sort of changed the status quo, though, for Scholastic was the way they handled the adventure book itself. Rather than being like Star Wars Missions, where it was all one book, what they did was presented a prose story. In this case, the first one, Search for the Lost Jedi. And you had them by Ryder Wyndham and Dave Wolverton again, along with another person, A.L. Singer. And in this case, what you've got is text, prose fiction, no gaming materials whatsoever built into the book. But you get to a point in the book where it basically says you can either read it as a book or jump away from it into the game. If you chose to do the game, your choices weren't built into here. There was an alternate book, smaller, okay, called the Game Book, and in that case, it took you through the same story, but whereas it was text, there would also be the game instructions. So in a sense, this is the equivalent of the Star Wars Mission book's take on gaming, whereas this is just a book very similar to, say, one of the Star Wars journals or Jedi Apprentice, Jedi Quest. Not quite as high a reading level, maybe like Science Adventures, but pretty close, okay? Pretty close in style. Episode 1 Adventures, pretty much throwaway stories. All stuff, for the most part, taking place around the time of The Phantom Menace.